They didn't know if they could really follow their leader well. I'm just saying to you, it would be very difficult to overstate the importance of being a trustworthy leader. All leadership operates on the basis of trust. Business psychologist Mitchell Perry reports that companies who fail to demonstrate character often report less productivity, fewer profit margins, and are hit with more lawsuits in the end. Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Nobody trusts the leaders. Nobody trusts each other. And again, trust is absolutely critical. In fact, that's why I'm hearing more and more organizations today saying, hire for character, train for skill. Meaning, I can train you in all these skills we need you to do. I cannot build your character in a week or two. You've got to build that over time. Let me give you a handful of statements to illustrate why this is such a critical issue. Statement number one, your ability may carry you further than your character can sustain you. In other words, your gift may throw you out there onto a stage or a field or in front of a crowd, and that gift may have nothing to do with how much your character can hold you up. Character, in fact, is the infrastructure of your life that holds you up so that you can use your talents and your gifts. Think of it in terms of a building. You can look at the outside of a building and all you see is integrity doesn't keep pace with it. And finally, number three, our commitment to integrity can be easily eroded by our love of progress. In fact, I really think this is the problem that most of us have. It's not that we're bad people, or like I said, we're not out robbing banks or committing murder, but I think we love to make progress. We love to grow and move forward. And so sometimes in our love of moving forward, we'll fudge or compromise some of the principles or values or ethics we have just in the name of making progress or winning a game or winning at something. We want to be better, look better, be the best. And again, we fudge who we really are to get to where we want to go. Think about it. Your gift may put you on the stage, but it's your character that's going to keep you there. That's why we've got to pay attention to the invisible qualities that nobody else can see. So, let me take a minute now and define just what character really is. I think our character is the sum total of 4 simple ingredients. I should say simple to understand, hard to build. But I want you to jot these down, or at least make mental note of them, and begin to talk about these in a small group. The 4 ingredients are these. Number 1 are self-discipline, meaning I have the ability to do what I need to do, even when I don't feel like it. Number 2, our emotional security, meaning I'm not always comparing myself to someone else. I'm secure in that I'm not always competing with others or somehow in some competition between my virtues and their virtues or my looks and their looks. Somehow I'm steady and secure and stable on the inside. Number 3, my values and ethics, meaning I have a list of principles that I live by and, if need be, am willing to die for, that govern how I act. In other words, my life isn't about reacting, it's about acting from the basic principles that I've chosen to live my life by. Think about it. Companies have core values, schools have core values, churches have core values. Why wouldn't you personally have a set of values that you live by that govern how you lead your life? And then finally, number 4, your personal identity, your sense of identity, meaning knowing your strengths and weaknesses. Are you okay with who you are? Or again, do you tend to plummet when you start looking at somebody else's Facebook page and you see how much fun they're having or where they got to go or who they are, who they're with, and pretty soon your identity is in question because you don't think you're measuring up. Think about it. What if your life was able to exhibit those 4 ingredients? So the bottom line is this. The iceberg simply teaches me I must lead myself before I try to lead anybody else. It always starts with self-leadership. In fact, I think if I lead my own life really well, other people want to follow, with or without a title or a position or a badge. Years ago, I got to take an Alaskan cruise, and I got to see some icebergs way up north. The bottom line is this. The iceberg simply teaches me I must lead myself before I try to lead anybody else. It always starts with self-leadership. In fact, I think if I lead my own life really well, other people want to follow, with or without a title or a position or a badge. Years ago, I got to take an Alaskan cruise, and I got to see some icebergs way up north. And I learned some lessons about the iceberg, not just what I'm teaching you now, but I learned there are other icebergs. For instance, there's an iceberg called a whistler. And I learned rather rapidly the whistlers are a little bit different. They're simply an iceberg that has all of its substance above the water. There's nothing below the surface. It's like a floating ice cube. But someone explained to me you can always tell a whistler by the noise it makes and by the fact that it's always drifting. I'm just saying, that's how people are too. Stuff that's above the surface but nothing below, lots of noise, lots of drifting. But there's another one too. There's an iceberg called a growler. That's an iceberg that has an equal amount below the surface as above the surface. And we learned that you can tell those from the others by the fact that they often tip and twist and turn. Birds might land on them but can quickly fly away because this just turns on a dime. Again, people that are like growlers are the ones that might look like they got plenty below the surface, but they may turn on you. All I'm simply saying is every one of us need to pay attention to what's below the surface. That's the lesson of the iceberg.
Okay, did you enjoy that? Did you understand that? It's quite clear what the iceberg principle is about?
Yes.
What is it about? Yes?
Never judge a person based on what they show, because there's always an other side to it.
Never judge a person just on what you see, because it could be other things. So what's the definition of character? Character is based on 4 things. What are they? What's the first one? Self-discipline. What's self-discipline? What's self-discipline? Being authentic with yourself, doing what you say you'll do. Isn't that so? Right? Okay, that's the first one. What's the second part of the definition? Emotional security. What is meant by that? Do not compare yourself with others. Be happy with who you are. Okay? Thirdly, what's the third part of the definition?
Values and ethics. Value and ethics.
Value and ethics. What does that mean?
The rules you live by.
The rules you live by, correct? And what did he say? The rules you live by, you'll die for it, right? So in a moment, I want you to write down some values, some principles that you live by. Come what may, even if it means giving up a lucrative job, you'll do it. If it doesn't comply with your values, but you'll do that in a moment. And the fourth one? Sense of? What is meant by that? What's meant by sense of identity? To know yourself. Okay, what I want you to do very quickly now is just write down some principles, some values by which you will stand. Be it honesty, integrity, justice, giving of your best, anything. So write down about 3 or 4 principles or 3 or 4 values that you live your life by or you would like to live your life by. You will not compromise them under any circumstances. Okay, do you want to share 1 or 2 of them? What would one of your values be?
Trustworthiness. Trustworthiness.
Trustworthiness, right? Anyone else? What about you?
Honesty, integrity.
Honesty and integrity.
Humility. Humility.
Humility, yes. You?
Perfection.
Perfection in anything you do, correct?
Honesty. Honesty.
Honesty. Those in the back, yes. Loudly, can't hear you.
Confidence.
Confidence, yes. Okay.
High self-esteem.
To have a high self-esteem, okay. What are other values that you stand by? You will not compromise under any circumstances. Any of you here? This row, second row? Respect. Okay, so you understand what character means. Character is made up of those 4 principles. Now what I want you to do is there is a very quick questionnaire I want you to complete. And this is doing a evaluation. It is 4 questions, and there's 1 to 10. You are required to show, this will show your character on a scale of 1 to 10. Rate yourself in the following areas. So 1 will be the lowest and 10 will be the highest, being the strongest. So for instance, self-discipline, you have the ability to do what is right, even if you don't feel like it. Where do you stand between 1 and 10? Similarly, core values, these are the principles you live by that enable you to take a moral stand. Third, sense of identity, you have a healthy, realistic self-image based on who you are. And fourthly, emotional security, your emotional health enables you to be stable and consistent. Okay, so there's 4 questions, 1 out of 10. 1 is the lowest and 10 is the highest. Okay, just pass this around, please. Very quickly, you're going to be keeping that. This is a self-assessment. And be honest with yourself, not what you would like the answer to be, but what it is at the moment. What's your answer? Circle them. Circle them. How are you doing? Okay, are we done? So from that, we'll have an idea of what our character looks like. Yes? Haven't got. Okay, what you do is take when she finishes, just take the question and write down the answers here. Right? Okay, so that will give you a good indication of how you assess your own character. And ask yourself this question: why did you give yourself the scores that you did? So in some instances, you see you might have given yourself a score of 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10. Ask yourself why. What is it that's lacking? What is it that you have to improve? Okay? So just write down next to that score, especially if it's a lower score, why is it that you've given yourself that score and what you need to do to improve. You're going to keep this, so be honest with yourselves. You know, there's on this particular topic, there's an example that's given in the book, and this is about an incident that occurred in Georgia in America, not far from where this Dr. Elmore lives. He's the one who's developed and started this whole organization of growing leaders. So what he says is that in the area near to where he lives, there was a team, high school team, that had won the championship. However, only after winning the championship did the coach realize that one of the players was not eligible to play for his team. And that player had played not more than 45 seconds just in one match during the entire year. So he was facing a dilemma. Should he just sweep it under the carpet, no one will know, or else inform the authorities that they had an ineligible player and to hand in the championship trophy? What do you think he did? No one knew about it besides himself. What do you think he did? Swept it under the carpet. Okay, he decided to tell the authorities. He had to forfeit the championship trophy. And he said that it's very easy for us to have done this, but we have to do the right thing. Now, quote, we look at the definition of character. What's the definition of character? Now you look there, one of it is also about ethics. So he said that we needed to do the ethical thing, and in the eyes of the community, although they did not win the championship that year, they were champions. What remained in the mind of the entire community is the honesty that they displayed on that particular occasion. Right? So we need to ask ourselves also, if we are faced in a situation like that, what would we do? Would we be ethical or unethical? An incident that comes to mind also, this happened in America some years ago, where there was a police officer and a murder was committed in his area. They did not know who committed the murder. Then one day his son said that I needed to have a face-to-face honest discussion with you. He said, okay, what is your problem? So the son then confessed to the father that he committed the murder. No one knew about it. There was no evidence whatsoever against this youngster besides his confession to his father. What do you think his father did? Arrested him. The father took him straight to the authorities, handed him in, and said, my son committed the offense. The penalty for that offense in that state was the death penalty. The only person who could give evidence against the son was the father. He went to court, he gave evidence against the son, and the penalty was death penalty. So he said this was the right thing to do. Right? So this is ethical conduct. This is character building. And character is something, as we said, it's not something that you can teach. It is something that one develops over the years. And that is the point I was making. The 10% that you see above the surface, the skills, that is something that can be taught. Character cannot be taught. And therefore, just drum this into your head, that when you're going to be looking for work in the near future, if you're going to go and work for the top companies in the world or in South Africa, they're going to be looking more at your character than your qualifications. Qualification is in its place, but character is what will differentiate you. Coming to causes like this, doing social work, doing community work, having certificates that you can show the employer that you've done extracurricular activities to benefit the community, to benefit the people around you, that is what will count. Okay, any questions? Understand what we discussed? Happy with it? We'll take it home and implement it. Within how many hours we have to implement? How many hours? 48 hours. If we don't implement within 48 hours, as I mentioned, it's unlikely we're going to implement it. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this particular segment. There's much more, but we don't have time. I've given you notes on this particular topic. You'll find it in the USB that will be given to you. We'll take a 2-minute break. The last final guest is here. We have in our midst Advocate Yusuf Ismail. Yusuf Ismail is a practicing attorney. Just some background regarding his qualifications before I go into where his real speciality lies. He's a director of the Law Clinic of KwaZulu-Natal on the South Coast. He lectures at the University of South Africa. He is an independent researcher on religion and politics. And he is IPCI's comparative religion specialist and public debater. I might be wondering, he's a lawyer, how did he get involved with comparative religion and public debates? He took his cue from looking at the lectures, looking at the literature of the late Sheikh Ahmed Deedat. I would encourage all of you. In fact, what we'll try and do is finish about 5 minutes early, and Mohammed Khan will then just take you for a tour of Sheikh Deedat's study, and you can see exactly how everything was during his lifetime, and it will take you about 5 minutes. I think that's important since you've come all the way here. So he was inspired by the work of Sheikh Ahmed Deedat, and Sheikh Ahmed Deedat, he was one of the luminaries in South Africa as far as da'wah work went. In fact, on occasions, long before Mandela was even became famous, long before that, if you went anywhere overseas, and I had a personal experience, if you went anywhere overseas and if you told them that you were from South Africa, they say, oh, Ahmed Deedat's country. That was how they knew South Africa. It was only after that when Mandela came into the limelight and then they fought for his release that people became aware of Mandela, not before that. In fact, when Mandela was released and when he went overseas, and whenever he went, people asked him, how is Ahmed Deedat? Now, Mandela didn't know who Ahmed Deedat was. So he made it a point that when he returned to South Africa, he went and visited. At that time, late Ahmed Deedat was not well. He went to his house, he visited him. That's the first time he interacted with him. So this is who Ahmed Deedat was. So Ahmed Deedat's debates really inspired Yusuf Ismail. He then did research. He then got involved in debating as well. And I'll just give you an idea of the type of debates that he was involved in to show you who, in fact, we've got to do a presentation to you today. Some of the debates he was involved in was with Glendon Hermanus. Topic was New Testament, is it reliable? This was at the Hellenic Hall in Port Elizabeth. He had a debate with James White in 2013 in London. He had another debate with him, if I'm not mistaken, in 2017, yes, in London again. He had debates with Jonathan McLatchy, also of London. This was, I think, so on Skype. Did the original followers of Christ believe he was God? He had a debate with Tony Costa, also from overseas. He had a debate with Osama Dak, and he is, I think so, an Egyptian American. Is ISIS a true representation of Islam? Another debate, he had a background of slavery and violence in Quran and the Bible. And then he had a number of presentations at the churches throughout South Africa. But that's just some, and it goes, and there's another 3 pages listing all the debates that he had. So we are fortunate, we've got someone of his caliber, of his expertise, and he's still young, only in his early 30s, and he's achieved a lot. So with those few words, let me invite Advocate Yusuf onto the podium. And the whole idea is to try and expose you to people from different backgrounds. And the idea is to also cover different topics. You might think, but now where does this fit into our whole program? It does fit into the program, but you'll get a better idea when you see the bigger picture later on. So with those few words, let me call Yusuf Ismail.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, rabbi shrah li sadri, wa yassir li amri, wahlul uqdatan min lisani, yafqahu qawli, sadaqallah azim. My dear children, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's just odd that I was speaking to a different group of students just earlier this morning at the Mangasudu Technikon in Mlazi, and one thing you realize is that in terms of the individuals that you communicate, even in terms of dawah, when you are giving out dawah, when you're giving the message, there are different levels of individuals that you communicate your message to. If you want to speak to the Pope, and if you want to speak to someone in kindergarten, there are different approaches. And sometimes the way in which you can get to somebody's heart is basically to tap into their innate nature in terms of something that is close to them and something that is innately part of them. And so it's a privilege with the Advocate Vaid. I think he gave me a call, when was it, a few weeks back, through Muhammad Khan, and yesterday we had difficulty communicating. And so I saw it as extremely important to speak to most of you. I think most of you, he told me grade 11, 12? Is grade 11, and is that standard 9, right? Standard 9, standard 10. I've been out of school for some time. So I assume that grade 11 is standard 9 and grade 12 is standard 10. It just confuses the entire system. And just age, most of you, are you studying sciences? Are you studying just the standard mathematics, English, Afrikaans, maths, biology? Is that what most of you do? The vast majority of you. Okay, so just give me some degree of indication in terms of where we're heading. Now, if you look at the generation that we are faced with today, look at the schools, the schooling system. There's a lot that one can talk about education and, of course, the standard of education in South Africa. But the generation that we see today, who are going to be the future leaders of tomorrow, the challenges most of you face were totally unheard of during our generation. I mean, I was schooling in the 80s and 90s. And in the 80s and 90s, things like a cell phone, nobody ever heard of a cell phone. Nobody thought about the idea. We always had a handheld phone which you could communicate with people, a big bulky object, but nobody even contemplated the idea that one day you're going to have a phone and an object in your pocket and you can just pull it out and make a phone call. Nobody thought that you could communicate to someone via something called Facebook. Nobody heard of email. I think email, the very first time it came out was when, 95? 1995. I think about 95, 94. And my dad he was a semi-retired lecturer at Durban West. For the very first time, academics and teachers and lecturers introduced this whole novel idea of the email. And it seemed very amazing to me that just simply the type of a button, you could communicate with anyone around the world. We had in my generation earlier than that, in the 80s and the 70s, something called pen pals. You've heard of pen pals? Do you know what a pen pal is? Pen pal is you'd have maybe a list of addresses somewhere far afield as China, maybe Timbuktu, Russia, Siberia, and then you'd start writing to them, and then months later you may get a reply. You find it odd? Now, I can communicate to someone in the North Pole or the South Pole immediately, and in the next 2 or 3 minutes, he will get, I'll get a reply. So information is basically fast. Technology is moving, and it's going to improve and going to increase by the day. And so with that, obviously, you have the positive elements, and of course, you're going to have the negative elements as well. With the rise of information technology, you can also put out information about people that you dislike, about people that you hate. If you heard of something called trolls, you know what trolls are? Trolls on Facebook, all of you know what trolls are, someone who stalks you. But it's easy to not just get out and target individuals, but you can also target systems, target people, target religion, target religious worldviews. And so, whereas in the 1960s and the 1950s and the 1970s, if you look at some of the essential compendiums that form the fabric of the Islamic worldview, for example, the Sihah Sitta, the Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abu Dawud, Ibn Majah, and so on, all these material which was in some instances very much limited to the so-called religious establishment. Now, if you have to go on the street and you come across a missionary, he has access to something called Ibn Jarir Tabari, which is a voluminous compendium on the early history of Islam and the Quranic commentary. Easy, on your cell phone. I haven't brought my cell phone, but just on your cell phone, I'll give you 6, 7, 8 volumes on the phone itself. So information is easily available, information is easily accessible, and the challenges that previous generations faced are no longer the same as the challenges that we face and the challenges that you are going to face in subsequent generations to come. Now, I hope most of you have ambitions, and I take it that a lot of you do. Well, the vast majority, 100% of you have ambitions to become something in life. Unfortunately, the most of us, when we grow up, we grow up with this essential principle, and I think probably maybe Advocate Vaid may have alluded to it, or some of the other speakers, that when we want to talk about success, the idea of success, what's success? Ask your parents or family members, he's successful. What do they mean? When someone says he's successful, what do they mean? He's made a lot of money. So essentially, you find, for example, traditionally, even in the Indian community, in the Muslim community, what do they want you to become? They want you to become either a doctor or a physician or an accountant or well, whatever, all these kind of professions which at a very essential level seem to provide the means in which you can basically make a meaningful living in life. But beyond that, there's no discussion or attempt within the Muslim community to internalize the idea that what do we do to reshape society around us? What do we do to reshape society? Most of you were not born during the time of Nelson Mandela. None of you. Am I correct? Anyone born in 94? 95? 96? 97? 98? Are you all millennial babies? 2000 and onwards. Were you born on the 11th of, anyone born in September 2001? 9/11. But most of you come from a different epoch, and so the challenge is that 10, 20, 30 years down the line, do we have it in ourselves to say, look, besides, and no one says you cannot make a success monetarily and materially, but do we have any idea in terms of how we're going to reshape society around us? You know, when we grow up, and even now you can see that as you grow older, you operate into a certain pattern. Religion doesn't have a role to play in society. In the sense, I'm not saying religion shouldn't have, religion doesn't have a role to play in society. For example, when you see the opening of Parliament, what's the role of religious figures and leaders? What do they do? What do they do? They come there and they say a prayer, and then what happens? Nothing. Or or in your school, for example, unless you're going to an Islamic school where there's some degree of interaction with your faith, you say the prayer and that's it, and then you go ahead with your daily secular work. But do you ever see a situation whereby some of the essential core of your faith is used to reshape society? Things, for example, there are concepts in Islam like khilafah, vicegerency, adl, ijma, all these ideas which are deeply rooted in the Islamic worldview. How are we using this? How are we drawing into them in shaping society? We're not. We are basically doing our day-to-day work. We're going to the masajid, we're going back home, and we're just living life as it is. There is an atheist, someone called Sam Harris. You've heard of Richard Dawkins? Well, Sam Harris is an American atheist, and if you go to exclusive bookshops, most of you have gone to exclusive bookshops or Adams, he's a noted American atheist, and he's also a popular critic of Islam. And he was interviewed by someone called Bill Maher, M-A-H-E-R. He's an American talk show host. And in the interview, they were discussing something about a girl, a schoolgirl, called Malala Yousafzai. You heard of her? She was shot by the Taliban, Pakistani education activist. And he made the comment, and people applauded him for that, and wrongly so, is that she was the best thing to come out of the Muslim world in 1,000 years. Now, at the outset in that comment itself, what you see is a negative perception. That in 1,000 years, he's implying that there was absolutely no contribution by Muslims in anything, in society in general, in science, in philosophy, in history, in evolution of thought, nothing whatsoever. She was the best thing that would come. And this is generally the idea that is perpetrated in the mass media, in social media, where there is this perception that Islam is essentially backward, that Muslims have, at least the Muslim faith has absolutely no meaningful role to contribute in society, and that Muslims, by their very nature, are inherently violent because of the tenets of their faith. You've heard of this? And you also see it in, popular Hollywood films, in your Hollywood movies. You see this, there's this theme that is being presented. In the 70s and in the 80s, you had, for example, these so-called action films coming out. One individual character called Sylvester Stallone, Rambo movies, you heard of that? And if you look at the theme in the 80s and the 70s, back then you had a common enemy, the communist threat or the red threat. So for example, in one of them, he basically is in siding with the Afghan Mujahideen to destroy and fight against the Russians. And then subsequently in the 1990s and then in the 2000s, 2010 and so on, you see the theme changes and the enemies also change. So you come across new films, The Siege, Executive Decision, Delta Force, all these and now here the common enemy is the Muslim threat, the Islamic threat, the Muslim bogeyman, in a manner of speaking. And so what this does is that it has this perception of conscientizing the minds of millions of people out there to the extent that they are systematically brainwashed and stereotyped into having certain ideas and beliefs about people, about the faith. And so from the Islamic point of view, there is indeed a lot of negativity, an Islamophobic element that is basically churning out this on a day-to-day basis, with the result that you have a lot of misinformation, which is indeed our duty as Muslims to confront. And we have to confront this. We can confront this from a knowledge point of view in terms of education, but also in terms of our behavior and in terms of the meaningful contributions that we can make in society in general. Not just speaking, but also action. Because speaking is easy, anybody can come and talk. That's the easiest thing you can do in the world, is to come and talk, speak, and then you go home and go to bed, and that's it. but action is what actually counts. Now, coming back to what Sam Harris said, this statement of his just basically showed, and I'm just going to highlight a few things, the so-called ignorance in terms of Islam's long and proud history in the field of education. The first university in the world was formed by who? By who? Muslim Maulanas, alims, sheikhs, who formed them? There were two Muslim women in the year 859, Fatima and Maryam al-Firhi. They created the world's first Islamic education, so-called university in Morocco. And that formed the basis of subsequent educational institutions propping up in different parts of the world. And so even the idea, for example, of the concept of awarding degrees, you know, when you award degrees and then you get a BCom degree or a BA degree, all this idea of even awarding degrees, it began in, started in Morocco, then it spread to Fez, Andalusia, Spain, and then later you'd have universities in Bologna and Italy, and then Oxford obviously adopting the same system. So here you find that, you know, a key institution, the university in itself, which is by and large today viewed as a Western educational institution embedded in Western thought and Western ideas, in fact had Islamic origins. But very few people know that. One of the greatest Muslim contributions to civilization, for example, began in the 8th century when Muslim scholars inherited volumes of Greek philosophy. And so not just did they translate some of the material that they received, but they also utilized the knowledge and they effectively spread the knowledge around the world. So you take one particular example, Imam Ghazali, who wrote the monumental Ihya Ulumuddin. He basically synthesized many of the elements in Greek philosophy, and he used it to diminish excessive rationalism from groups like the Mu'tazilites and so on. You have another example, Ibn Khaldun. He's one of the key architects, arguably viewed as one of the founders of modern day sociology. He wrote something called the Muqaddimah, and that in fact paved the way for subsequent generations to utilize his work and then basically spread it in different parts of the world. We have in 872 in Cairo in Egypt, Ahmed ibn Tulun Hospital. That was created with elaborate medical functions and activities, affording totally free medical health care to the public itself. And then 100 years later, you have someone called Al-Zahawi, who is the father of modern surgery, and that basically his encyclopedia of surgery was used by many Western academics at a later point in time. And one can go on, the medic Ibn Nafis, he described pulmonary circulation about close to 300 years before William Harvey, who's viewed as a discoverer of the whole notion of pulmonary circulation. Now, what's the point in terms of basically mentioning this? Because, you know, you can go on and you can pat yourself on the back and then basically just gloat in some of the glories of the past. The point is that, you know, we have this notion that Islam has the answers. You're correct? You hear this in the pulpit. Islam has a solution. You know, even in the Islamic movement, they make this claim, Islam has the solution to the problems of mankind. Now, how many Muslim countries are there in the world? Approximately 59, 62, part of the OIC, give and take. And when you look at these countries, do you see any solutions? Any solutions being offered? You look at the Middle East, do you see any solutions that have been taking place for the past to the problems from the 20th and 21st century? I mean, you can talk about global hegemony and economic takeover of land and foreign invasions and so on, but when you look around the Islamic world, do you see solutions? Or do you see a society enveloped in ongoing and perpetual problems? So now people may well then ask that if that is the case, that your society is based on inherent problems, then how can Muslims boldly make the claim that Islam has the solutions to mankind's problems? There has to be some degree of disconnect at some point. Unless, as what some scholars argue, that the Quran does not provide ready-made solutions to the problems of mankind. It has, for example, essential principles. It has very few laws, but it doesn't say, here are your, this is what you do, these are ready-made solutions to the problems. It doesn't do that. But what it does do is that it gives and presents a just and moral framework within which we as the individuals can find the solutions to the problems of our particular society. Does that make sense? So for example, someone living in the 11th century or the 10th century, are his problems the same as your problems? Does he have the same problems as us? No. So now the solutions that we want to, in utilizing the Quran and internalizing the Quranic message and the Islamic message in finding the solutions to the problems of our community, can we use his model and superimpose it in the 21st century and find the solutions to our problems? Can we? Of course not, because the challenges are different, the society is different, the environment is different. And so what this means is that all of us, we have to basically do away with this whole notion which is called the law of agency. You see, when we were in madrasa, and I don't know how it is today, we were basically given the sabak, alif, beh, teh, theh, and then subsequently you are weaned into reciting certain passages and verses of the Quran, and then you are taught basically how to read your salah, how to fast, you taught diniyat, a bit of Islamic history, not too much in detail, and that's it, and then you go on with your life. But then, after a while it occurred to me that learning Islam in this fashion, what it means is that we have a particular rote learning approach, whereby we just simply read the Quran in many instances better than the Arab. You know that many of us can read Arabic better than the Arab without understanding a single word of Arabic. It's like me reading Shakespearean English better than the Queen herself, and I cannot understand a single word of English. Can you imagine that? If you read English in a very sophisticated, articulated fashion, and people hear you reciting it, and then they ask you, what did you say? And then what are you going to say? You don't know, because you don't know what you said. But many of us are taught like reverts as children. We're taught like how our forefathers are taught, because when they came from India and when they came from Pakistan, I mean, they had their economic challenges, and so what they needed basically something which was quick, something which could basically make them read their namaz, roza, all of this, what they are taught in the Urdu vernacular, and basically go about and do their daily living. It was a battle for survival. But in doing so, when you continue with the same system, what happens is that then you create this whole notion of agency whereby you don't have a connection with the Quranic text. How many of you have read the Quran? All of you. How many of you have read the Quran many, many times? If I ask you, Kirsty, what's the 19th chapter of the Quran? What is Surah 19? What's it called? I'm not trying to run down anybody here. I'm just wanting to show an exercise. What is Surah 19? What is Surah 3 called? What is Surah 3? Surah 4? Surah 5? So if you're reading a storybook, how many of you read Harry Potter? Well, what was the first book of Harry Potter? What was it called? Harry Potter and the what? Is it the Philosopher's Stone? So you can remember Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. But what was the second chapter of the Quran? The point is that the reason why, and if I were to ask you, if we had Hufaz here, we would be able to recite it beautifully and melodiously. But the point is that because there is no connection with the Arabic text, and I speak the same because I went through the same system. So I have a right to critique it because I went through the same system itself. The reason why is that there is no connection with the Quranic text. If I give you an instruction, if I buy you a computer and the only instruction manual is in Mandarin, which is in Chinese, Mandarin, that's I think the descriptive term for the Chinese language. And only in reading that manual you'll be able to decipher how to operate this computer. What would you do? You'd attempt to, at the very least, understand what the manual says, or get it translated, or something along the line to basically connect with operating the mechanics of the machine that you basically have. But now, when the creator of all things, when the creator of everything sends an instruction manual to us for purposes of how to operate this physical computer, this body, in relation to other bodies, and there is a manual, how would we utilize the instruction manual in terms of day-to-day living? Would you just simply say, no, I'm doing the job by reading it, reading the text, and that basically fulfills what I'm meant to do? I mean, if you were to read the Chinese manual in Mandarin perpetually for the rest of your life without understanding a word, would you be able to operate the computer? No. And so, this is another distinctive aspect that is extremely important. Maybe your generation can engage in the essential overhaul of the Islamic educational system, whereby we basically make all of us, this generation and subsequent generations, an actively engaging society. So we can read the Quran, we can understand the Quran, we can internalize the message of the Quran, and we can reshape society around us. Use the tools, we've got it here. This is your instruction manual. The Quran is not a book of laws, it's a book of guidance for humanity at large. But we can't call humanity to that guidance if we ourselves are not guided by the book through pure lack of understanding of what the instruction in fact informs us of. Does that make sense? So when you open the Quranic text and you read there, Ya Ahlul Kitab, Ta'alu ila kalimatin sawa'in baynana wa baynakum. O people of the book, come to common terms as between us and you, that we worship none but one Allah, that we associate no partners with Him, and that we take not amongst ourselves lords and patrons other than Allah. Or Ya Ahlul Kitab, la taghlu fi dinikum. Or wala taqulu thalatha. Or many other verses. What you can essentially see is that give and take 1/3 of the Quran is addressed to different communities, Jews, Christians, and humanity at large. So for example, you hear repeatedly throughout the bulk of the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, or you have accepted faith. Ya ahlul kitab, O people of the book, meaning Jews and Christians. Ya ayyuhan nas, O humanity. Ya ayyuhan nas, O humanity. So here's an instruction to the whole of mankind. So it's our duty to make this book available, to make the information available, to make the commands available to the rest of society and to ourselves in order to reshape and rechange how we basically view ourselves in relation to each other and in relation to some of the problems that we effectively face in society in general. This is why, and this is how the Arabs understood the message. There was a historian by the name of Thomas Carlyle. He wrote a book called Heroes and Hero Worship. And one of the chapters of his book was The Prophet as a Hero. He delivered a portion of this lecture in 1840 to primarily an Anglican audience of Christians. And in describing the rise of the Islamic Empire, he said that this was a nomadic, backward community which were burying their daughters alive, engaging in sanguinary warfare, killing each other, murdering each other. And when the spark of Islam touched Arabia, he says it was as if the very sands of the desert of Arabia were transformed into a magical gunpowder. And out of that gunpowder, the entire world was illuminated with the light and the spirit and the truth of Islam. And so as a result of that, as a result of the emphasis on reading, as a result of the emphasis on education, as a result of the emphasis on traveling the world and learning and garnering knowledge from all sorts and all walks of life, that is why the early Islamic society made such an immense and enormous contribution to the world out there. Such a meaningful and important contribution, to the extent that even Edward Gibbon, he wrote a book called Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire in about 2 volumes, stated that it was in fact the Islamic worldview that in fact gave rise to the European Renaissance. Europe, and whatever subsequently transpired and happened, and the development after the industrial age, was by and large, in many instances, a product of the Islamic empire and the Islamic worldview. But unfortunately, something happened in history, and now religion, and Islam particularly, is extremely arbitrary, extremely peripheral. And like I mentioned earlier on, our role in society, and not just the role of Muslims, but even the role of Christians and Jews and Hindus, the role is one of relativism. And what I mean by that is that we have a relative position in society. When it comes to, for example, building mosques and masajids and churches and synagogues and temples and so on, in a normal secular state, nobody will have any kind of objection. The state will not have an objection. But when it comes to actual utilization of the tools in the Islamic worldview to reshape society, that is when the problems basically arise. And so if we believe that Islam doesn't provide ready-made answers to the problems of mankind, but it provides a just and moral framework within which we can basically find the solutions, then that means that our generation and the forthcoming generation should use the book as a starting point. Knowledge doesn't end with the Quran. Knowledge proceeds from it. Knowledge proceeds from it, and from it you can basically change society around us. There are, for example, as I mentioned earlier on, concepts like ijma, concepts like khilafah, which is vicegerency. You know, when people talk about a caliph, they sometimes have in their minds people like Baghdadi or Bin Laden or whatever the case is. But in actual fact, the utilization of the word khilafah in the Quran is generic. When Allah tells the angels, I'm going to create a vicegerent, a khilafah, who is he referring to? He's referring to man in general, humanity. Each and every single person here should be a khalif, a khilafah, man and woman. Which means that men have a meaningful role to play in society, and women also have a meaningful role to play. And if women are not being afforded a meaningful role to play in society, then you need to demand your Islamic rights. I was walking in Iqraa just a few days ago. There was an elderly gentleman. I gave a lift, I know him, and he had his son along with him, teenager, just like you. And we were just chatting. He belongs to the Kingdom Halls, Ministry, Jehovah's Witnesses. And he made a telling point. And we just chatted and we started talking, but the boy asked the question, and he says, why are women basically kept oppressed in Islam? This is the idea that they basically have. And it occurred to me that I could have basically discussed the whole history of Islam and the role of women and the liberation that Islam provided to women, and the fact that it gave them economic independence in the 7th century. They had the rights to own property, rights to inherit, and I could go on and also discuss, if I wanted to, the thoroughly shameful role that women have in terms of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and you have concubinage and slavery, and they're reduced to the status of chattels, and so on. I could have discussed all of that. But then it occurred to me, he raised a telling point. He gave the example of the masjid. He says that if he wants to bring his mother or his sister to come and see the masjid, can they come inside? And the problem is that you can go inside the Jummah masjid, we can take you there. But the problem is a lot of our masajids don't even open the space for women, don't actually make a meaningful contribution for women to in fact occupy, play a role. And so then it occurred to me, what right do I have to basically challenge him on his stereotypes when in our own communities, we basically allow the oppression to be writ large. We keep closed enclaves of close-knit communities. You can do this, you cannot do that. You reduce Islam to a series of do's and don'ts. And that's it. This is halal, this is haram. And then you're paying the halal agency thousands of rands to certify a product which you could already certify for yourself. The point I'm trying to emphasize is that we erect these artificial barriers. We ourselves are problematic in the sense of permeating the negativity and the stereotype that others out there see towards us. And so you can only break this if you maintain an interpretative relationship with the text of the Quran. Allow the Quran to speak to you and you communicate with it. I've came across a fantastic book by arguably one of the leading Islamic futurists in the world. It can be available, you can purchase it. It's called Reading the Quran, The Contemporary Relevance of the Sacred Text of Islam. It's by a British Pakistani futurist by the name of Ziauddin Sardar. You've probably heard of him. And he has many discussions in this particular book, many things, many approaches in terms of the Quran and how to approach it, how to read it. And one of the issues is that he talks about the whole notion of the question of authority. That when it comes to approaching the Quran, when it comes to reading the Quran, when it comes to sharing the message of the Quran, for decades upon decades, regardless of the community